Primal Sea Wolf here, from coming to you from nature, and here to talk to you about some primal and very esoteric things. Today I want to talk to you about, well, before we get started, I have a piece of raw grass-fed New Zealand beef sirloin steak here that I'm enjoying in nature. Might as well, if I'm going to be in nature, I might as well eat the natural human diet. And that means raw meat. Beef 60-day dry aged, grass-fed New Zealand sirloin. Oh, fantastic. Divine. I've also got a piece of New Zealand grass-fed lamb, and enjoying it as well. So I want to talk to you today about something that's very dear to my heart and something that I hold very closely, but I feel compelled to share. About 3 years ago, I became aware of the natural human diet, and the natural human diet involves raw meat. After some time of eating raw meat on a regular basis and experiencing the bliss that it brings at a physical level, I started to question, how can we have lost such important information? How can a species be so sick that it doesn't even understand what its food is? And of course, this compelled me to look to nature, as it often does with primal folks. Being in nature, looking to nature's rules and principles and archaic values, I found solace by looking back into the past, into our primordial origins. But at the same time, we live in a modern matrix, so to speak, that requires us to govern ourselves in very unnatural ways. And so I came to an impasse psychologically and philosophically about how to proceed with this situation. Looking backwards into the primordial past, I found truth and I found healing, and with the raw meat, it woke me up. It took me 3 years of looking inward and healing physically to start to form a congruent mindset and philosophy that assisted my operating procedures in my will to power, so to speak, in my own subjective hero's journey. And the paradigm of this conversation is that it was actually looking backwards that started the thought, the idea, but only by looking forward did I find solace. Because we don't have an option to retreat to nature, and it's kind of a cynical concept to retreat, to give up, to think that there's no hope or that there's nothing worth living for within the matrix or within this society. And so what I'm going to talk to you about today is a concept that was outlined by Friedrich Nietzsche, actually. He was a philosopher, a German philosopher that lived in the late 1800s. And he espoused that we need to look forward in addition to looking backwards to find the truth in our trajectory within this illusion. And so that's what I'm going to talk to you about today, is Friedrich Nietzsche, his philosophy, how eating raw meat brought me to him and woke me up to his mindset, philosophy, and operating procedure, which is extremely congruent with primal esoteric things. So today I want to talk about Friedrich Nietzsche, and I hope to bring you along with the journey and share some things with you. My content is not for everyone. It's not for the faint of heart. For those unwilling to look inward and look into the abyss, please stop watching now. It's not for you. This content is not for everyone. I am not creating a shotgun. I do not hope to reach the masses. I am only creating this content in hopes of reaching a select few elite individuals that have the compulsion to collaborate and to conversate constructively on points salient to this discussion. So without further ado, let us get started. So today I want to have the focus of the conversation surrounding probably my favorite book that I've ever read. With the exception of Aajonus Vonderplanitz's We Want to Live. Fantastic, probably my favorite book. With the exception of that book, I should say my second favorite book that I've ever read is Thus Spoke Zarathustra. It was written by Friedrich Nietzsche. And in Thus Spoke Zarathustra, Zarathustra is the main character, and he goes to the mountains in the wilderness to find himself, to raise his consciousness, and to look inward. He does this at the age of 30, and between the age of 30 and 40, for 10 years, he lives, he looks inward, he stays in a cave, he communes with nature, and he looks backwards to our archaic principles. I identify with this aspect of the story because this also was part of my journey. When I woke up to the primal esoteric truth that raw meat and the primal diet and the natural human diet of raw meat and raw fat is the truth, I started to look backwards into the past, just as Zarathustra did. He went to the mountains, and in the book he says 6,000 feet above men and time, he went away to look inward. And I did much of this myself. I've gone to nature, into the wilderness, sat, meditated, looked inward, tried to identify what is the malfunction here that I am so unique relatively compared to most of the slaves and sheep that live in this world, that I've woken up and understood that raw meat is real food. And so Zarathustra remained in the mountains for 10 years in the solitude, and his spirit and his consciousness grows, and he pierces the enigma of man and his existence by looking backwards into the archaic past and the primordial values. And so in the book, one morning he wakes from his solitude, and overflowing with wisdom, he rises at dawn and speaks to the sun. And I'm going to read a quote here of what he says to the sun. "Great star, what would your happiness be if you had not those for you who shine? You have come up here to my cave for 10 years. You would have grown weary of your light and of this journey without me and my eagle and my serpent." Remember this eagle and the serpent. It's going to come in. I'm going to have to tie this in here in a moment. "Behold, I am weary of my wisdom, like a bee that has gathered too much honey. I need hands outstretched to take it." Zarathustra decided that it was time for him to detach himself from his heightened consciousness, and likened himself to the setting sun shining its rays on him. And so he decided to descend from the mountain in the wilderness and return back to civilization to speak with the people, the slaves and the sheep, and tell them what he had discovered. Share his wisdom with ordinary men. And he said, "I must descend into the depths as you do at evening," speaking to the sun, "when you go behind the sea and bring light to the underworld. You superabundant star. Like you, I must go down. Behold, this cup wants to be empty again, and Zarathustra wants to be a man again. And so during his descent from the mountain, he comes across a hermit living in the forest, another man of solitude looking inward, much like him. And this man asks Zarathustra, what business do you have, you enlightened being, speaking with these slaves and these sheep? They will not understand you, and they will not receive you. And Zarathustra replies that he loves mankind, and he wants to bring them a gift, and he's overflowing with wisdom to share with them. The old man then warns Zarathustra that mankind will likely not take kindly to his offering, but will respond with ridicule and torment. Zarathustra brushes this man aside and continues on his path to share his newfound wisdom with the sheep. He soon comes to a town where people are gathered, and there's a spectacle in the central square where a tightrope walker is making a presentation of walking across a tightrope. And he's preparing to perform. So Zarathustra seizes the opportunity to speak to the people that have gathered in this town, in this village. And he begins by teaching this crowd the cosmic creative principle he has of evolution. And I'll read another quote here. I teach you the Superman. Man is something that should be overcome. What have you done to overcome him? All creatures hitherto have created something beyond themselves. And do you want to be the ebb of this great tide? Return to the animals rather than overcome man. Look backwards into the archaic principles, is what he told those people. See, Zarathustra had developed a cosmic principle, an archaic truth. And this principle he called creative evolution. And in contrast to Darwinian evolution, this proposes that evolution is not guided accidentally through mutations and adaptations, but by an esoteric force which regulates the development of life from a lower spiritual state to a higher one. In other words, that evolution is a spiritual evolution from a lower state to a higher state, and that the path that we've taken from our primordial beginnings as half animals to ourselves now with our technological civilization is a natural progression of the expansion of consciousness. And it's this consciousness evolution that we're looking at. And so this was the foundation of the discussion that he opened with these villagers. And he suggested that this force, this expansion of consciousness over time, is felt in the emotion of these humans as aspiration. Aspiration to create, aspiration to evolve, aspiration to look forward, not backwards. And according to Zarathustra, he told these people, you can overcome yourselves and you can evolve by looking forward, but still being connected with the past, of course. But moving forward, expanding your consciousness forward. And so, in the story, Zarathustra is at this village, and he's talking to these villagers. He wants to share his wisdom. He's explained the concept of the Superman, and he makes the metaphor between the tightrope walker in the square that's presenting to these villagers and the message that he's trying to give, which is man is on a rope fastened between animal and Superman, a rope over an abyss. So as Zarathustra had gone to the mountains and looked back into the archaic past, he's making the metaphor of this beginning of the journey on that tightrope was our archaic past as half animals. We're somewhere along the middle of this path, this hero's journey. And at the end is the evolutionary expansion of consciousness to something else, something greater, something better, something to strive towards and to look forwards to. And so he says, but the danger on the rope over the abyss is the hero's journey. We must live dangerously if we were going to walk this rope on a spiritual evolutionary path. We must take great risk. Freedom is dangerous. Live for the sake of transformation. Those who live in this manner are the individuals who he called the Superman, the Übermensch. And so again, the idea, the concept of looking backwards into the archaic past, finding archaic primordial principles, waking up to the natural human diet would definitely be a part of that process. But somewhere along this very dangerous tightrope with the abyss below you and all the pitfalls that are associated with it, we have to keep moving forward and away from those archaic values while still embracing them. And this gives us hope, a path towards life affirmation, and what he called the Übermensch, the Superman. But after making this speech to the villagers, and Zarathustra was not welcomed, and they didn't like what he had to say. They didn't understand it, much like most of the people that are watching this video won't understand what I'm saying. So Zarathustra changed his approach, and he begins to discuss the path of decline in Western civilization, crippled by disability of values. He warns that this decline is breaking and turning into the opposite of the Superman. He called this the last man, the counter ideal of the Superman. So as Zarathustra is presenting his speech to these villagers in the village as he's come down from the mountain, they're not receptive to it. They don't understand it. They don't want to hear it. So Zarathustra changes his approach. He comes at them from a different direction. And he begins to discuss the path of decline in Western culture, crippled by the disability of values. He warns that this decline is breeding the opposite of the Superman, the opposite of looking forward into the expansion of consciousness. And he called this the antithesis to the Superman, the last man, which is basically all the sheep and the slaves and their consciousness that we encounter in everyday life. And this last man does not create. He consumes and satiates his pleasure through consumption, and this is how he finds happiness. He points to the fact that we live in a technological society which is advanced and brings luxurious standards to our standard of living, and it's the most advanced technological area in human history. But despite his pleasures and comforts, he's empty and miserable, with no truly meaningful goals to pursue. And this pain is what causes one to it brings suffering and pain and cynicism. And the path is not clear for transforming to something better. Again, the last man is not looking forward to expand his consciousness, the opposite of the Superman. He's stagnant in his nest of comfort, and he is miserable. This misery and suffering that comes from the lack of purpose that this materialistic technological society seeks creates victims, and the people cannot bear to see folks flourishing and embodying some higher value, or the expansion of consciousness, or the Superman, or the Übermensch, as Nietzsche called it. And he said that this leads to de-individualization of every person becoming equal and striving towards equality in suffering. And the last man's utopia, they often like to use this utopia, is one which total equality is maintained, not from without, but by an oppressive ruling class, but within. In other words, they don't even need a shepherd anymore. They're such sheep that they just stay with the herd without any inclination or it just becomes by their nature. And so he's suggesting that the Übermensch is moving down that tightrope to an expansion of consciousness, and the last man has given up on that direction, and he's basically become stagnant. And in this stagnation, he becomes cynical, unhappy, pain. He experiences pain and suffering. And then he says, through the evil eye of ridicule, they have no herdsman and only a herd. Everyone wants to see the same thing. thinks the same thing, wants the same thing. Anyone who doesn't agree with this concept or this direction is labeled crazy, schizophrenic, all these other mental illnesses that they like to label, and in need of repair and medication. And so upon hearing Zarathustra's speech about the Superman and the last man, the crowd cries to give them the last man. Give me the last man. I don't want to be a Superman. It's too hard. Looking into the abyss is difficult. So Zarathustra thought back to the path that brought him to the village, and this hermit that warned him that these people would not receive him and they would not listen to him. And he started to reflect on this, and he started to look inward again. And so in this inward looking, he took the next evolution in his own path on that tightrope. So these villagers that he had come down to meet as he came down from the mountain, he came to them out of love and with a gift, and they responded to him with ridicule and contempt. And so Zarathustra realized, and this is a very important realization, that the majority of the sheep are utterly incapable of understanding the profound significance of what he had to offer. In other words, he was no longer going to speak to them anymore. He decides it's futile to speak to everyone. He will speak only to the select few, the elite folks that feel compelled to listen, who actually have the potential to rise above the herd. He said, and I quote, "Follow me because they'll follow me because they want to follow themselves. And they want to go where I want to go." So he seeked out like-minded men, elite level, awakened folks to come with him on his journey of consciousness expansion. And he gave up entirely the idea of waking everyone up. This is an important aspect of this conversation. So as Zarathustra leaves the town in search of this select elite few individuals, he comes into contact with a flying eagle that has a snake wrapped around its neck, not fighting each other but embracing each other. And this is very strong symbolism. For the eagle symbolizes the highest aspirations of the spirit, the one side of this tightrope. And in mythology, it's often portrayed in a very positive light and towards consciousness expansion and these types of things. Whereas the snake is a symbol for our animalistic desire and evil things. So the snake embracing the eagle is symbolism for what he's trying to espouse. And this embracing of the eagle and the snake represented that development within ourselves, that we must not only embrace where we started on the tightrope and our archaic principles, but also lift our shadow out of its psychological depths and acknowledge the capacity for us to move forward and expand our consciousness. And this gives us a life-affirming, very positive, non-cynical operating procedure in which to govern ourselves as we wake up within this matrix. So again, thank you for viewing today. This is just the beginning of my creation of content and this discussion. We've just barely touched the surface. I would encourage you to look at Nietzsche and Thus Spoke Zarathustra. I would also encourage you to look at Aajonus Vonderplanitz in his book, We Want to Live. And for those few inclined that this piques their interest and their curiosity, for those who resonate at a frequency that is congruent with this conversation, I invite you to collaborate with me, converse with me, and share your ideas, whether you disagree with me or not. We live in a world where we're surrounded by sheep with slave consciousness, and we live in a zoo, and most of us are zoo animals. Well, I suppose we all are to various extents. Some of us are more aware than others. And so as a result, I've decided to create this content in hopes of attracting that very few elite minority of folks, just as Zarathustra did, in the same way. I understand this is not for the faint of heart, and again, it's not for everyone. I'm not trying to create some sort of big mass following. I'm really looking to attract folks that are within a very small niche of understanding and awakening, and looking to forwardly expand their consciousness in a life affirming, as a Superman, as the Ubermesh. And so I'm creating a community for these folks to network with each other, collaborate in furtherance of our collective growth on our subjective heroes' journeys. You can check out my work if you'd like to at primalesoteric.com, and feel free to like and subscribe and leave a comment below. Thanks for your time today. I wish you the best on your hero's journey as you expand your consciousness.